Imagine, just for a second, your most valuable possession. How far would you go to keep it safe?
Hmm.
Now, think about a time way before banks, before any kind of secure storage. You've only got a few essential things. How do you protect them?
It's a very basic, real problem.
Exactly. And it's what we're exploring today as we dive into an ancient Buddhist monastic law. We're looking at something called Nissaggiya, XXIX.
It sounds technical, but it's really about monks dealing with everyday issues. Theft, loss.
Yeah, completely practical. So our mission today is to really dig into how this specific rule about monks' robes came about, how it evolved, and just how incredibly detailed it got.
We'll see how the Buddha and the early monastic community, the Sangha, had to adapt to things they didn't expect.
Right, balancing the monks' well-being with, keeping their simple lives intact.
Mhm.
And all our insights, they're coming straight from this ancient text, which is like a window into their world.
A fascinating window.
Okay, so let's set the scene a bit to unpack this. The records say the Buddha is in Savatthi, staying at Jetavana Monastery.
A famous location.
And after the rainy season retreat, the Vasa, a lot of monks would go off to live in these Aranyakesu Sinasanesu,
Forest abodes, secluded places.
living very simply. Just an alms bowl, maybe a few robes. That's about it. But even there, problems cropped up. The texts mention these Katika thieves. It seems like Katika, a particular time of year, was known for increased danger, especially theft.
Right, so you have these monks with almost nothing to their name.
And suddenly, even their essential robes are at risk? That must have felt incredibly vulnerable.
It really shows how practical challenges arise, doesn't it? Even for ascetics. So to tackle this risk, the Buddha first gave permission.
What was the initial step?
He allowed monks in these forest places to store one of their 3 robes, the Saiga, Uttarasoga, or Antarasaka.
That's the outer, upper, and inner robe, basically their whole wardrobe.
Exactly. They could store one inside a nearby village, Antaragar Nikipitin, the text says, near where they'd get their alms.
Okay, that sounds pretty logical. Keep it safer in the village. But you often find with rules, there are unintended consequences. Did things go wrong?
Oh, they did. It's a classic situation, really. Monks started, well, maybe bending the rules a bit.
How so?
They'd leave the robe in the village, but then they'd stay away from it for a tirakachara more than 6 nights.
Longer than intended.
Way longer. And the results, pretty bad for the robes. They got lost, ruined, sometimes even burned.
Burned. Wow.
Or, and this is quite vivid, undurehi pikajanti, eaten by mice.
Eaten by mice. You don't really think of pest control as a major issue for ancient monks, but there you go.
Exactly. And for someone with so few possessions, losing your main garment to mice or mildew wasn't just, an annoyance. It was serious.
Yeah, I can imagine.
They became dukala, badly robed, and lukakivara, having rough, poor quality robes. And this naturally led to complaints.
From other monks.
Yes, especially the apachad. Those monks committed to having few desires. They saw this as negligence, carelessness.
So this initial solution, it backfired.
It really did. And it's a great example of how even a well-meaning rule needs refinement when it meets, well, human nature and practical reality. You need iteration.
That really paints a picture of the problem.
Yeah.
So the Buddha sees this happening, the robes getting ruined, the complaints. How did he respond? What was the next version of the rule?
Well, his response was quite direct. He rebuked the monks responsible, calling them mogapurisa, foolish men for their carelessness.
Strong words.
And then he established a new sikkhapada, a training rule. And this is where it gets really interesting, the level of detail involved.
Okay, so who did this revised rule apply to? Still the forest monks.
Yes, but with much more precision. It was specifically for monks in forest abodes considered sasaka sammatani, risky, and sapatipayani, fearful.
Risky and fearful. How do they define that? It wasn't just a feeling, right?
Not at all. The text gets specific. A forest abode was defined by distance, at least 500 bows away from the nearest village. That's quite a walk.
500 bows. And risky.
Sasako meant you could actually see signs of thieves having been there, places they'd camped, stood, sat, even slept. Real evidence.
Wow. Like forensic evidence almost?
In a way, yes. And fearful sapatipaya was even more serious. That meant places where people had actually been seen harmed by thieves, killed, robbed, or beaten up.
So this is based on documented danger, not just general anxiety.
Precisely. Verifiable risk assessment.
That is remarkably detailed for an ancient text. Okay, so for monks in these specific, defined, dangerous places, what was the actual rule now?
The core was this. If a monk living in such a place wanted to store one of his 3 robes in the village, antaragandikapeya,
Okay.
and if he had a valid reason to be away from that robe, kasadivapakayo,
The legitimate purpose, yeah.
then he could be away for a maximum parama of 6 nights, charatapatapanan.
6 nights. That's the magic number.
That became the crucial time frame, yes.
And what if they pushed it? Stayed away longer than 6 nights?
Well, that's where the formal offense kicks in.
Right. This is the Nissaggiya Pachitiya part.
Exactly. If a monk stay away, tako se utari vipavasya, more than 6 nights, unless he had formal permission from the Sangha, the community, anintrabhiksamutya,
Without community approval.
then it became a Nissaggiya Pachitiya.
And what do those terms mean exactly? Nissaggiya.
Nissaggiya means it involves forfeiture. The robe has to be given up, surrendered.
You lose the robe. Okay. And Pachitiya.
Pachitya means it requires expiation. It's a category of offense, less serious than some others, that needs confession and sometimes a formal act to resolve it.
So lose the robe and confess the mistake. A 2-part consequence.
Correct. And the offense was considered committed satame arungumain at the dawn of the 7th day. Very precise timing.
Wow. And how did the forfeiture work? Did they just hand it over?
There was a formal process. The monk had to approach the Sangha, or a group of monks, or even an individual monk, and state clearly, idame bante ke vara. Basically, Venerable Sir, this robe of mine has been away more than 6 nights without Sangha approval. It's subject to forfeiture. I forfeit it to the Sangha.
A formal declaration.
Yes. It really underscores the importance of community accountability in the Vinaya, the monastic law. It's not just a private matter.
Yeah, it's like a legal system almost, with clear procedures and consequences,
Yep.
not just vague moral advice.
Very much so. Legalistic precision is a hallmark of the Vinaya.
Okay, so this 6-night rule seems clear, but you often find loopholes or, edge cases in any system. Was it always an offense if you stayed away too long? Were there nuances, exceptions?
Absolutely. And this is where you really see the practical wisdom, I think. It wasn't just a blunt instrument.
So when did it definitely count as this Nissaggiya Pachitiya offense?
Well, obviously, if you stayed away more than 6 nights without Sangha permission. But interestingly, it's still counted even if you only thought you were away too long, atirakazani, or if you were unsure, pematiko, or even if you mistakenly thought it was less than 6 nights, nunakasani, but it was actually more.
So your perception didn't get you off the hook if the fact was you stayed too long without permission.
Exactly. The objective fact mattered. And it also applied if you, say, pretended your robe was lost or ruined just to have an excuse to stay away longer.
Oh, trying to game the system. They thought of that too.
They certainly seem to anticipate human ingenuity, let's say.
Okay, so those are cases where you forfeit the robe. What about lesser issues? Were there, minor offenses related to this?
Yes, there were dukkhaya offenses, which are considered minor wrongs. For example, if you had a robe that should have been forfeited, but you just kept using it without actually going through the formal forfeiture process.
Using it illicitly, kind of?
Right, or another dukkhaya. If you were away for less than 6 nights, but you wrongly thought it was more, or you were just doubtful about the time, that uncertainty or wrong perception itself was a minor fault.
Interesting. So intent and perception mattered for the minor offense, but not for avoiding the major one if the time limit was actually broken.
That seems to be the logic, yes. But then, crucially, there were many situations of anapati, no offense at all.
Okay, this is important. When was a monk totally in the clear?
Well, straightforwardly, if you were away for exactly 6 nights, or of course less than 6 nights.
Right, on the limit or under it.
And here's a clever bit. If you stayed away for 6 nights, but then you physically returned to the boundary of the village where the robe was stored, even briefly, and then left again.
Like checking in.
Kind of. That action effectively reset the clock. Your next absence started counting from 0 again.
Huh. That allows for some flexibility while still requiring diligence.
It seems so. Also, no offense if you managed to retrieve the robe, pakudharti, or formally release your claim to it, visajeti, before the 6 nights were up.
So taking action within the time frame clears you.
Correct. And, very importantly, if the robe was genuinely lost, ruined, burned, stolen, or even taken by someone based on mutual trust, basically, if the robe was gone through no direct negligence of the monk regarding this specific time rule.
If it wasn't your fault in that way.
Then there was no offense under this particular rule. There might be other considerations, but not Nissaggiya Pachitiya for exceeding the time limit.
Got it. That makes sense. Any other exemptions?
Yes, two key ones. If the monk had actually obtained that formal Sangha approval, bhikkhu samutiya, for a longer absence, the community could grant exceptions.
Community oversight again.
Exactly. And finally, no offense for someone who is considered umadakasa insane, not legally responsible, or if it was the adakamikasa, the very first time this type of offense was committed by anyone, the originator case, before the rule was fully established.
Okay, that covers a lot of ground. It's surprisingly nuanced.
It really is.
So wrapping up this deep dive then, we've gone from a simple problem monks needing to protect their robes to this really quite intricate rule.
We have, from that initial broad permission that didn't quite work.
With the mice and everything.
Right, to a much more sophisticated regulation. It shows how the Vinaya, the monastic code, wasn't static. It had to evolve based on practical experience and, well, human behavior.
It feels like a real testament to adaptive problem solving, actually.
I think so, too. And, this might seem like it's just about ancient monks, but it touches on themes that are relevant to any community, really. Well, any group, whether it's an ancient monastery or a modern company or organization, has to figure out how to balance individual freedom or convenience with the well-being of the whole group.
Right. And how rules get made, how they get tested in the real world, and how they sometimes need fixing or refining.
Exactly. You see that iterative process right here. They tried something, it had problems, they analyzed why, and they came up with something more precise.
It makes you think, doesn't it, about our own systems today. How often do we create rules or regulations and then really circle back to see the unforeseen consequences?
That's a great point. Are we as diligent in refining things based on real-world feedback?
And that emphasis on community approval, the bhikkhu samutiya, there may be a lesson there for us, about collective responsibility versus just top-down rules in certain situations.
Perhaps. Empowering the community to make context-specific judgments within a framework rather than having a rigid rule for every single possibility, it certainly gives you something to chew on.
Definitely. Something to ponder until our next deep dive.